Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, along with my colleague from California and so many others tonight, I rise in opposition to the President's nomination of Russell Vought to lead the Office of Management and Budget. My colleagues and I are here, it's now shortly before midnight, to go through the night to make this case because this nominee has already demonstrated exactly how dangerous he would be if confirmed. We know that from the last time he worked in the Office of Management and Budget, and we know it because of his work in the last few years. And despite not even being in the office yet, he has already, through his work on Project 2025, driven a reckless budget decision that created immediate chaos and uncertainty across the country. The duty of the Office of Management and Budget Director is to assist the President of the United States in faithfully executing the laws passed by Congress. Notably, this does not include single-handedly turning off federal funding. It was just a few weeks ago that Donald Trump was inaugurated, and that day, as chair of the year-long inaugural committee, I made the point that there are three branches of government. Otherwise, we would have had the inauguration at some countries, a presidential palace, or in some gilded executive office building. In fact, that inauguration was in the Capitol for a reason. And that is because in our country, we have three branches of government, three equal branches of government. And Article 1 of the Constitution makes it clear that the Congress makes decisions about funding, the Congress. And in this case, on a bipartisan basis, year after year after year, and it's not easy, and it always can be a mess to the end, but we come together, Democrats and Republicans, and make a decision about funding. And it is the job of the executive branch, in addition, of course, the President of the United States, signing off on this, but the executive branch then implements it. But in this case, things are backwards and upside down when the Office of Management and Budget comes in with a plan that had actually been devised by this nominee to freeze the funds. Millions of Americans awoke to find that vital federal funding had been frozen, not by Congress, not by a confirmed official in an administration, but by an unelected advisor acting from the shadows. And yes, it was chaos, big surprise. People lost access to essential services. Agencies scrambled to interpret conflicting statements. It was in, 24 hours later it was rescinded, and then the press secretary to the President of the United States put out a post that no, all the funds were still frozen. Even the administration itself had to walk back its decision after a federal judge ruled it unconstitutional. That this whole mess that hurt regular people, and I still wake up every day and say to myself, has Donald Trump brought down costs for housing or child care? Has he created more housing or child care that a number of people who voted for him thought they were going to get? Has he brought down the cost of prescription drugs? Instead, what do we see? We see this chaos. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a decision made by an official with legal authority. Let's be clear about exactly what happened. Russell Vought was not in the administration. He's before the Senate right now. That's why we're here tonight. He was not in the administration, but his fingerprints were all over this scheme. According to reports, he was a driving force behind the administration's decision to freeze federal funding. Stephen Miller even credited, someone very close to Donald Trump, even publicly credited Vought with coming up with the idea. It was Vought's plan that led the administration to take an action that hurt millions of Americans. Now, I have heard from constituent after constituent terrified about, is this federal funding freeze that clearly the administration wanted to do, and then a court stepped in, and it's only temporarily paused, But I've heard from my constituents, because for some of them, their funding is still in trouble. Others don't know what's going to happen next. So here are some Minnesotans, regular people, what they had to say following the decision to unilaterally, unconstitutionally cut off support that families across the country rely on. One constituent wrote to me saying, the late night decisions, the freezing of federal funds already appropriated by Congress from an undisclosed group of entities is outrageous, illegal, and gross mismanagement. It is the throwing of lives of your constituents into fear and chaos. She continued, the administration is offering conflicting information and no real answers as to what is going on. Even more money will need to be spent. This is going to be challenged in court. It's going to be a mess. Instead of just working it out, what a waste. That's right. There's a budget coming up. There's decisions to be made about taxes. There is time to debate this and decide, even if I don't agree with what the president wants to do, but there is a very clear way that this should happen, and this is for the upcoming budget. But instead, want to make a big scene, want to hurt a lot of people, that's what happened. Another constituent wrote in, concerned about her client, someone works in the area of mental health, and she talked about how her clients rely on some of this funding. She said, executive branch interference with this funding not only creates massive economic harms, but also directly violates the Constitution's delegation of spending powers to Congress. Now, I will say there's a silver lining here. Regular people are actually looking at the Constitution. They're saying, how can this happen? How can an unelected billionaire come in and try to get data? How can you just stop funding in the middle of one day with one single memo from someone that's not even elected? So maybe I should go look at the Constitution. What does it say in Article 1? What's my role in this as a citizen in electing people? Another Minnesotan wrote, I am a parent of a pediatric cancer survivor, and our family relied on the Katie Beckett program to survive before we moved to Minnesota. This program runs through state Medicaid, she explained, and it affords all families whose children have life-threatening diagnoses financial assistance as a secondary coverage, regardless of income, while they make their way through treatments and while recovering from the significant impacts of these treatments. Without access to this, she asked, what will happen to these kids? But then again, acting in this way does seem to be a pattern. And people are figuring it out. And believe me, there are a number of people in my state who voted for Donald Trump and voted for me, okay? And why'd they vote for Donald Trump? Well, they wanted change. They were worried about their costs. They thought, okay, maybe he's going to do what he says he's going to do. Maybe he's actually going to do something and work with people, try to bring costs down. And now they're seeing this chaos, in my mind, which will be leading to, which I've already seen with the firing of the inspector generals, this corruption, these constitutional grabs at power, unconstitutional. One constituent who teaches a class on cancer research at the University of Minnesota wrote about this research funding. And our state has a lot of research between Mayo and University of Minnesota, cutting-edge research. She says, the students I'm teaching are dependent on National Institute of Health support. The patients I'm seeing are helped by National Institute of Health-funded clinical trials. Our Cancer Center trial organization and the core facilities at the U of N that help conduct these trials. Cancer patients on clinical trials may die because of pausing of federal support for these trials. Another cancer patient. Please do everything you can to restore National Cancer Institute funding immediately. I'm in treatment for 4 different cancers. It's the 5th time. Why would you stop the funding? It's even impossible to contemplate. They're referring, of course, to this memo that was sent out with the blessing of the Trump administration under their administration, sat out there for 24 hours, then gets repealed, but then the White House says, no, we still want to freeze all the funding, and then a federal judge has to come in, but of course that's only temporary. A different Minnesota worried about her niece who's being treated for triple-negative breast cancer in an NIH-funded trial. To have the funding cut off could have deadly consequences for my niece, she wrote. This is her second round with this very aggressive cancer, and she is getting results from the clinical trial. She has 3 small children at home and is fighting as hard as she can, but without this trial, I'm not sure what her physicians would do. Someone else from my state. The havoc that the administration is causing with the on-again, off-again freezing of federal aid and the freeze on the work of essential public health agencies like the NIH and the CDC will have devastating consequences for our economy and citizens if allowed to stand. She continued, I know you will do your best to protect and stand up for Congress's constitutional rights. Again, my constituents, I do see this as a silver lining, are looking at what is the role of Congress? What did our founding fathers want? What is the role of the courts? Can the executive just stand in there and do anything he wants? And of course, the answer is no, which is why you've seen litigation, which is why I've urged my constituents to write emails to me with these stories, because actually we will create a record of exactly what is going on as these court cases continues in states all over the country. Because right now we have an administration, a president that took the oath to follow the Constitution, to support and defend the Constitution, but doesn't seem to be reading it. So she writes this, I know you will do your best to protect and stand up for Congress's constitutional rights. My family and I appreciate the work you do as our senator, and I like that you work across the aisle, she says. During this critical time, however, we urge you to do everything you can to be in Congress to thwart these illegal acts. The extra constitutional games need to stop and the rule of law must stand. The president is not a king and cannot be treated as one. Another constituent, like many others, is worried about what this freeze will mean for seniors. As you know, she said, our adult day center relies on federal funding to provide essential services to seniors in our community, specifically Title III caregiver respite. These funds support a wide range of programs, including health care, social activities, nutritional support, all of which are crucial for the well-being of our participants. The sudden pause in federal funding has put these vital services at risk, and we are worried about the impact on our seniors. She continued, many of our participants depend on our center for daily care and support, and any disruption in our services could have severe consequences for their health and quality of life. We are particularly concerned about the lack of clarity regarding which programs will be affected and the timeline for resolving this issue. She concluded, we urge you to advocate on our behalf and work with your colleagues to ensure that federal funding for programs supporting seniors is restored as quickly as possible. Our seniors deserve stability and continuity in their care. More on seniors. Another woman. My next door neighbor is 81 years old. She has to get injections into both of her eyes every 13 weeks. Without the injections, she will go blind. Good Day Foundation has helped pay for the injections. As of yesterday, they are broke. My neighbor had to pay $1,000 and $1,028 out of pocket yesterday. She is on a fixed income. How can Good Day Foundation get their funding back? My friend can't afford these shots. Another constituent, a senior herself, wrote, I am 73 years old and I live in housing that is covered by a voucher. I eat with SNAP funds. I am disabled and dependent on my CADI waiver to keep myself going. I can't be homeless at my age. Another Minnesota senior, I am currently enrolled in the Senior Community Service Employment Program through National ABLE Network. National ABLE is a nonprofit organization that helps job seekers learn their skills and connect with area employers to fill their job openings. Each year, they help hundreds of seniors like me get a job, and I want to make sure this program continues. I know age discrimination and not having the necessary skills have been a problem for me in getting a job in the past. He went on to say, the funding freeze would stop the payments that this program needs to operate, and that would negatively impact me and the organization I'm training with. The wages I earn while in training help me pay for bills that I otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. And you know, this is part of a pattern. When the president ran for office this time, he talked about bringing healthcare costs. He told us how beautiful it would be. Yet, what do we see when they come into office? In one of the first executive orders, different than this funding freeze, was stopping one of the key programs, a pilot for generic drugs at $2 a pop, to try to encourage more generic drugs. And when the nominee for HHS secretary was before our Senate committees, he would not commit to actually implementing the prescription drug negotiation bill that I had spent years trying to get passed, and we finally passed it. We finally ended the sweetheart deal that Big Pharma had because of congressional action that locked them into high prices and high profits at the expense of regular people, where Americans were paying, in many cases, twice as much as people in other countries. It's part of the reasons why there were bus trips from Minnesota to Canada to get less expensive drugs. My colleagues here all know that bringing down the cost of prescription drugs has always been a top priority, because in the United States of America, no one should be forced to choose between filling their prescriptions or filling their grocery carts. Taking on these big drug companies was not easy. They had 3 lobbyists and still have 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to stop us. AARP with us in the fight. So many seniors with us in the fight. What they didn't have was the power of 50 million American seniors who came together to say enough is enough. We passed our bill. There's a $35 cap on insulin per month, which the companies now, because of competitive pressures, have had to offer to non-seniors. There's a $2,000 cap for Medicare for people that are paying for services, $2,000 cap on prescription drugs. And then we have the first 10 drugs that have been negotiated with the prices taking effect in a bit over a year. Those first 10 drugs are done, but this administration, as the torch was handed over by the American people, this new administration is going to have to implement it. What was the result of the drug negotiations in the last administration? They picked the first 10 drugs and they picked blockbusters. I would have done a lot more than 10, but that was the compromise that had been reached. What are the first 10 drugs? They are drugs like Eliquis and Xarelto and Jardiance and Januvia, blockbuster drugs. The negotiated prices for those drugs, the pharma companies agreed, even though they were suing in court and still are, and losing every single case they brought to question the underpinnings of this bill. Republican-appointed judges, Democratic-appointed judges said, no, Congress has the right to make that change. Those 10 drugs, the prices down 60, 70%, and this is my favorite number. It's going to save 9 million seniors in 1 year and out of pocket $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion with a B. That's not even counting what it saves for taxpayers. But now this program, this change in the law, is in the hands of this new administration. This new administration is going to have to make sure those 10 drugs with the negotiating prices, that happens. But now the Biden administration, at the end of this year, as they were on schedule for 15 drugs, that's what our law that was passed in this chamber says, 15 new drugs, they're going to have to now negotiate that with the pharma companies. Well, that's going to go real well when they're already talking about getting rid of some of the other drug programs that take on pharma when their nominee for HHS won't even commit to doing it. And those drugs are blockbusters too. Diabetes, weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Rybelsus, Wegovy, all those drugs, Wegovy, all those drugs, they are on the line for negotiation. 2.3 million Medicare Part D enrollees take those drugs alone. In his confirmation hearings, as I noted, the President's Health and Human Service Secretary nominee, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., did not give a clear answer on whether or not he would uphold drug price negotiations. That's unacceptable. Make no mistake, these actions aren't going to lower costs. They're going to raise costs. And instead, what do we see? The chaos and confusion of all of these freezes. So, what else? Talked about health care. Next on to education. Here's what a Minnesotan wrote me after the memo came out that was later rescinded, but then the White House said, no, we want to freeze all these funds. Minnesotan wrote, I am reaching out as a constituent and a proud advocate for TRIO programs, which serve thousands of students across Minnesota and Wisconsin by providing academic, financial, and personal support. I'm concerned about the recent directive from the Office of Management and Budget to temporarily pause all activities related to federal financial assistance. He went on to say, this action could significantly impact TRIO programs' ability to serve low-income, first-generation students and students with disabilities who rely on our services. Please work with your colleagues in Congress to ensure that these programs continue. Another Minnesotan called the funding freeze extremely upsetting for me, as I am someone who works in this field and spends my time working to help students, to help those less privileged than me. He said one of those programs include TRIO. Each summer I teach students, I help them, they're extremely bright, and they don't have enough support. I write to you, he says, as a frustrated citizen and instructor, to air my grievances, as I am no longer sure what to do or how to proceed. Yeah, I don't really blame him, because one bureaucrat can just write a memo with a plan that was laid out by Russell Vought, laid out by that guy, laid out and consistent with what was in Project 2025, and now we're actually debating him, putting him back in the Office of Management and Budget again. One, again, of the things that I am quite astounded by is how much American citizens are looking at the Constitution. Listen to this letter. All these in just the last few days. I am writing to express my deep concern regarding the White House's recent decision to unilaterally freeze congressionally approved federal funding. So let's look at that sentence. Very clear. This constituent understands that it's Congress, Democrats and Republicans, that agreed on the funding, amounts, and that unilaterally this administration thinks they can just come in and take it away. That's not true. That's illegal. This action, the writer says, not only disrupts essential services and institutions that rely on federal grants and loans, but also represents a troubling overreach of executive power that directly violates our Constitution. This practice is an abuse of power that must be met with swift congressional action. So that's why we ask our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to listen to this constituent from the state of Minnesota, who's not a constitutional law professor, but all you have to do is open up the Constitution. And this constituent is wondering, why won't everyone stand up and say, no, we're willing to work with you, Donald Trump, on efficiency measures, on making government work better, but we're willing to do it only if it is consistent with the Constitution. She continued, I urge you to take immediate steps to hold the administration accountable. I appreciate your leadership and look forward to your response on how you plan to address this pressing issue. Please stand firm in upholding the Constitution. A different Minnesotan. I'm writing to you to express concern over the pause of federal loans, grants, and foreign aid and ask you to take all possible action to block the confirmation of the nominated OMB Director, Russell Vought. She continued, Russell Vought stated in his confirmation hearing that he would not guarantee that we would follow the laws. Now they're even watching the confirmation hearings. I think this is kind of good for democracy when people realize that these guys are serious, that it's not just a campaign commercial. It's not just something you say at a rally. It's not just something you put on X. This is real. She says, Russell Vought stated in his confirmation hearing that he would not guarantee he would follow the law in expending funds Congress appropriated. And in other words, he seems to believe he and the president have authority to selectively decide to make these pauses permanent, regardless of what Congress has appropriated. This is a grave violation of the constitutional authority granted to Congress and shows brazen disrespect for the American people's elected representative. I actually couldn't write it better. I like that. Brazen disrespect. And what I want to see is people understanding that this is brazen disrespect. It's brazen disrespect of the people that work in the United States Senate and in the House. But okay, put that aside. It's brazen disrespect of the people that sent us here. As I said on the day of Donald Trump's inauguration in that beautiful rotunda, when he brought that inauguration inside, that there were some pretty powerful people in that room. I think people saw the photos of the oligarchs and the like. But when it comes to the elected officials in that room, whether they're representative senators or the president or the vice president, their power actually didn't come from the people in that room. Their power comes from the people outside of that room. So when this constituent says that this was brazen disrespect in freezing the funds or devising this plan that Russell Vought had, she gets it. She gets it. This is brazen disrespect of our democracy, no matter what party you're in. She goes on to say, please begin educating constituents on the severity of this issue. I'm trying to do it tonight. Hopefully some people are watching on C-SPAN. Please also tell them how they can reach out to their representatives in the White House to voice their disapproval. Most people do not understand the power and leverage that the Office of Management and Budget Director has. I think that's true. Most people don't understand it. That's why we're here tonight. They need to understand the direct action, the impact these actions will have on day-to-day life for them and their neighbors, and what their options are for making their voices heard. So this chaos and corruption and this just assault on our constitutional powers, we have been seeing this since day one. Chaos is up. Corruption is up. And yes, egg prices are up. Because none of this is going to help people with their bills. One great example of this, when you look at everything that's been going and say, how do I tie this together? We know it's distraction, talking about things that aren't really going to help people. One of the things that was also hard to understand, but is all connected when you connect the dots, was the firing, the illegal firings of the nonpartisan inspectors general. This was, remember, it was just about 10 days ago, the middle of the night purge of government watchdogs, and it was a serious abuse of power. These are the people that are watching over the taxpayer money. These are the ones, no matter if the president's a Democrat or Republican, they go in, they look at what's going on in the agency. They often discover things like fraud. They discover things like paybacks. They discover things like bribes, because they're looking at all the books, and they're not just people sitting inside the agency. Those were the people that were purged. Those were the people that were fired. Those were the people that have been appointed during both Democratic and Republican administrations. What is it Shakespeare said? The first thing you do is kill all the lawyers. Well, with this administration, the first thing they did was kill off the inspector generals. Congress passed the Inspector General Act in 1978 to establish independent, nonpartisan inspectors general in each agency to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse and prevent improper political influence and favoritism. Inspectors general also save taxpayer money. They investigate corruption, as I just mentioned, and waste under administrations regardless of party. And studies have shown that for every dollar invested in federal inspectors general, Americans save approximately $13, because that's what they discover. They discover problems. To protect inspector generals from political interference, Congress has passed safeguards into law, including specific requirements that must be followed if they are going to be removed from their positions by a president. The law, which can be found, and I'm doing this for my very informed constituents, have been writing the office. Now they can look at a new law, because we care about the laws. That's what we're supposed to do here. We pass laws. The law, which can be found at Title V, Section 403B, states, if an inspector general is removed from office or is transferred to another position or location within an establishment, the president shall communicate in writing the substantive rationale, including detailed and case-specific reasons for any such removal or transfer to both houses of Congress, including the appropriate congressional committees, not later than 30 days before the removal or transfer. Congress wrote these requirements into law to provide inspectors general protection from political interference, to let Congress know what was going on. The president's decision, in which he just completely ignored these requirements and fired them in the middle of the night, is a violation of law. Firing these critical watchdogs, just like freezing the funding from an unnamed bureaucrat with a plan that was put in place with Russell Vought, just like, as my colleagues have been talking about tonight, firing Justice Department officials or asking for a list of people who work at the FBI just because they were assigned to a certain case. This is not consistent with democracy. I'm a former prosecutor. I always believed that my job was to do my job without fear or favor. No matter who we were prosecuting, no matter who was working with me, we followed the law. That is what has gone amok here. And that's why Americans are reading the Constitution. That's why they're calling this Senate so much that they shut the phone lines down the other day. That's why they're writing emails. And by the way, the benefit of that is we also have a record of the harm that is being caused. More than ever, the responsibility will fall on Congress and the people that elect us to conduct oversight and to ensure that the people in our government are working for the American people, not their unelected billionaire friends. More. Federal aid. Now, foreign aid. Why would people in my state care about that? Well, we actually do a lot with the world around us. We've got a number of businesses that do business all around the world. We have one of the highest rates of adoption from foreign countries. We have a number of refugees that are come to our state. Somali, Liberian, Hmong, that are a big part of the fabric of the state of Minnesota. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation. We are a successful economy in our state. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we didn't close down our doors, that we brought in people to work in the jobs, to work in the farms, to work in our manufacturing companies. So that's one of the reasons we care about the world around us. But there's another. My constituents actually see that if you just shut off foreign aid, as what's happening right now in our country, in the world around you, you're going to have a less secure America. You're going to create this huge opening for countries like Russia and China, which have been expending money in developing nations, to come in and fill the void. One Minnesotan wrote, "The freeze on U.S. foreign aid will prevent many vulnerable people from accessing critical resources, including clean water for infants, help for farmers to feed their families, medication for kids. People will needlessly suffer and die." He continued, "The freeze also risks irreparably damaging our country's reputation and credibility and gives opening to malign governments and terrorist groups. Further, it may increase irregular migration both in the Western Hemisphere and beyond. In short, a halt of programs will create instability, undermining the administration's important foreign policy goals to make the U.S. safer, stronger, and more prosperous." And could I say, a number of leading Republicans in my state have come out very strongly against what's going on with USAID for two reasons. One, they care about the world around me, maybe three. Two, they understand the impact it has on America. And three, they figure if he's going to start cherry-picking one agency and just decide to shut it down in violation of the Article 1 and all these things I've talked about of Congress's right to have the decision of funding, if he can do that, what agencies are going to pick next? He could just cherry-pick anything. Someone else said, "I am deeply concerned that any cuts to U.S. foreign assistance programs that save lives, promote global stability, and keep Americans safe will be a bad thing." She continued, "U.S. foreign assistance is not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. At less than 1% of the federal budget, it's a cheap and effective tool for improving global stability, gaining U.S. allies, and reducing the need for more U.S. aid in the future. Without this support, millions of people will face devastating, in some cases deadly, consequences." She's exactly right. Yet yesterday, as our colleagues know, the administration announced its intent to end USAID. The decision to abruptly end this when it counters extremism, fights diseases, and creates more markets for U.S. exports. My state, for instance, is the fourth biggest ag exporting state in the nation. That decision was reckless and it was dangerous, just like the decision to suddenly assess our allies of Canada and Mexico, 25% on tariffs. 25% tariffs. This is not good for our economy. When I think about the importance of USAID, I always think about a story that former President Bill Clinton used to tell about how at one point he went to an African nation and he toured some new factories that America had helped invest in, and they were making shirts, and he got a shirt and he put that shirt in the front of the closet so that every single time he opened the closet, he saw that shirt and he thought, they don't hate us. They actually like us. They like our country. And when they grow, as we've seen around the world, they're going to want to do business with America. They're going to want to buy American goods. They're going to stand with us when we have foreign enemies that attack us. All that, just pluck all that out of there. That is exactly what the Trump administration is doing right now. When we turn our backs on our friends across the globe, they will look elsewhere for support when they need it, including countries like China and Russia. It isn't only about being there for countries in need. It's also about our national security. Then other constituents of the thousands and thousands and thousands of emails and calls that we've gotten in just the last few days are concerned about what this is going to do for jobs. One Minnesotan wrote, I had a meeting with a nonprofit canceled this morning that is working on energy projects in southwest Minnesota. It was funded by a Department of Energy grant. At least half a dozen people will stop working on a project because of this. Due to the freeze on approvals, I could be laid off with thousands of other people I work with. A different constituent who runs another nonprofit was shocked this grant was only a drop in the budget bucket. But this is just a tiny example of the ripple effect that this pause in funding will have throughout Minnesota, where no doubt hundreds, if not thousands, rely on some funding. This pause will not harm us as an organization, but I can imagine how services will be impacted. Other Minnesotans fear that the freeze could upend their entire family's livelihoods just to have this happen so suddenly. As of today, they write, my wife and I will both lose our jobs. I will be unable to make phone calls as a deaf person using the video relay phone systems. We will lose our house and be unable to care for our disabled son. It will also affect the hundreds of thousands of disabled people my small U.S. Department of Education grant serves. Another constituent, a reverend, wrote, we are a family that has a disabled son. He is 15 years old, a freshman in high school, and is active in the community. She continued, we urge all leaders to protect programs essential to individuals who are often excluded. We especially want people with Down syndrome, autism, or other developmental disabilities and their families to be recognized as valuable and important for their role in the world. So what this is chaos, and people are starting to think of how will this work in my own family. Just today, we had a hearing of the Agriculture Committee. As you think about jobs and you think about the effect on people, we had the witnesses of the head of the National Farm Bureau and the head of the National Farmers Union there as our first witnesses. Both of them had submitted pretty pointed letters that completely set out the alarms on this administration's plans to put in these tariffs. And I'm a fan of targeted tariffs. I think you can do it. I've seen it with steel dumping from China. I've seen that once we did that and fought back, that we were able to keep the iron ore mines open in northern Minnesota, and I've supported other tariffs as well. But that's not what this is. This is a cross-the-board tariff. The day after imposing these tariffs, again, more chaos, just like we saw with the funding freeze, the administration decided to delay them. It's only created more uncertainty for Americans. But one thing is certain. These tariffs aren't going to lower the price of groceries like the president promised in his campaign. They're going to raise the price of groceries. They're not going to lower the price of gas. They're going to raise it. They are going to lower the price of housing. In fact, the Builders Association came out against them. They're going to raise it. Tariffs are taxes, and the new tariffs would be a tax increase on families of over $1,000 a year. Beyond the higher costs, these tariffs would threaten our critical trade partnerships with our neighbors, like Canada and Mexico. The U.S.-Canada relationship is particularly important for my state. President Harry Truman once said, Canada's relationship with the United States was compounded of 1 part proximity and 9 parts goodwill and common sense. I couldn't agree more. Our two countries share the world's longest land border, more than 5,500 miles, and almost 400,000 people, and about $3 billion in goods and services cross it every day. Minnesota exports more goods to Canada, ranging from ag products to machinery to medical devices, than we sell to our second and third largest markets combined. Minnesota exports about $7 billion worth of goods to Canada each year, and overall Canada imported over $354 billion in American goods in 2023 alone. That trade relationships with an ally that at one point on their embassy draped their embassy with banners that said friend, ally, partner. That strengthens our economy and our national security. It supports our manufacturers, farmers, and ranchers. It creates jobs. But the administration's announcement unravels these ties. When you look at the groups that came out against the new tariffs within 24 hours of the announcement, you can see why the president had to scramble back and get a pause. But again, damage done, because if you're a business in another country, you think, I don't know if I'm going to, there might be a tariff on that. If you're in Canada, you're like, maybe I should get my next shipment from somewhere else because I don't know if I'm going to be able to depend on the United States as a trading partner. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said the tariffs will only raise prices for American families and upend supply chains. Then you have both the National Association of Manufacturers and the International Association of Machinists saying they would put American manufacturing jobs at risk. The American Farm Bureau, as I just noted, warns that these tariffs threaten to deliver another blow to the finances of farm families. And the National Association of Home Builders said they would increase the cost of construction, and consumers will end up paying in the form of higher home prices. So you have complaints from the worker side, you have complaints from the business side, and you have complaints from the farm side. I'd say you're in trouble. And it's not only these groups, which do represent thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses and workers. It's people right in this building. And it's not just the Democrats who are here speaking tonight about what this chaos is doing to American families. Senator McConnell put it pretty well, and he talked today about this at the agriculture hearing, but he said it will be paid for by American consumers. He's absolutely right. Slapping new taxes on American families while planning more massive tax cuts for billionaires is not how you strengthen our economy. Lives and livelihoods are at stake. When I look at these constituent letters, and I literally have only read a fraction of them, I see that people are waking up. They are energized. They are starting to see that, I don't feel like I have much control over my life. And maybe that's why I voted for change in this election. But I actually wanted it to happen. And the other thing they say is I actually wanted Democrats and Republicans to work across the aisle. Like we do so much in this Senate. But what they didn't vote for was chaos. What they didn't vote for was corruption. What they didn't vote for was an unelected billionaire deciding he's just going to come in and run the government. They actually said, okay, I want to tip the scales a little. I want to see what can happen. Someone else in there. And then they thought we were going to work it out. They thought we were going to work on how to make government more efficient. They thought we were going to work on how to get them more housing with all these things I've seen that are incredible around my state, with incentives for private entities to work to do things like expand child care, or a bunch of businesses get together. We could do some things to create more incentives to make that happen, to expand existing private child cares, or this idea of creating more smaller child care facilities so that they're all ones in a row, apartment after apartment, so that they can bring in kids into smaller businesses. Or they thought maybe they're going to do something about consolidation, or Maybe they're going to do something so my kids, when they look at the internet, they don't see pornography and they don't get fentanyl dealers online. But instead, what do they see? Well, I guess talk about Panama and Greenland and talk about all kinds of things that really aren't relevant to their lives. They want us to do things that are relevant to their lives. And they do not want some unelected guy to come in and make all these decisions for them. Mr. President, these Minnesotans are only some, but not all, of the lives that this administration is playing with. They deserve better. The people of this country deserve competence, not chaos. We have already seen what happens when Russell Vought's vision for the Office of Management and Business and Budget is put into action. It leads to disorder. It leads to uncertainty. It leads to unconstitutional power grabs that hurt Americans. And that was even before he had the job. Because, you see, this was his plan from the very beginning. I implore my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to vote no on this nomination, to stand up as our constituents have asked us to stand up, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. No to chaos, no to corruption. Uphold the values of our Constitution. When you look at these nominees, fulfill your duties of advise and consent. Why rubber stamp every single one of these nominees? Why would you do that? Instead, look at what they plan to do. Are they truly qualified, or do they actually have the interests of the agency they're supposed to run and the interests of the American people at heart? Then make your decision. We cannot put someone in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, which, by the way, has now become a household word, an agency that many people had never heard of in my state, but they're now writing in letters in droves about the fact that they don't understand why an unelected bureaucrat could issue that memo and why we could put someone in place that devised this strategy, someone who has already demonstrated that he will abuse his power. Article 1 of our Constitution, which so many of my constituents are now reading up on, makes it clear that decisions about federal funding belong to Congress, not the President, and certainly not the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Russell Vought has showed blatant disrespect for the Constitution and the American people. He is not the man for this job. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,